This podcast is brought to you by Globalware.
Welcome to the AI Analysis Podcast. Today we're analyzing someone who's been in the news quite a bit recently, but who many people may not know that much about.
That's right.
We are talking, of course, about Nicolas Maduro Moros, the former president of Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
His political trajectory, which was, characterized by crisis and constant controversy, now seems to have reached a really stunning and abrupt end. We're talking about his capture by United States forces in January 2026.
And that phrase, abrupt end, it barely captures the shockwave that's sent through the geopolitical landscape. We are talking about a head of state.
A sitting head of state, for all intents and purposes.
Exactly. A figure who, for over a decade, controlled one of the world's largest oil reserves. He commanded this entrenched socialist government in the Western Hemisphere.
And now?
And now he's been physically extracted from his country. I think the context we have to grasp immediately is that he is currently incarcerated. He's at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, New York.
That location alone is just such a dramatic departure from the presidential palace of Miraflores. He was arraigned extremely quickly, too, January 5, 2026.
Right.
And he pleaded not guilty to some very severe federal charges, including drug trafficking and weapons possession.
Indeed. And it was anything but a quiet arraignment, was it?
Not at all.
During that court appearance, Maduro seized the opportunity to maintain his political narrative, declaring himself I think the quote was, a kidnapped president and a prisoner of war.
So the immediate legal and political crisis created by his capture is just immense.
It's huge.
So our mission today is to try and structure this hugely complex story for you. We need to go back, to the beginning.
We have to.
To understand the political foundation he built under Hugo Chávez, track the dramatic descent of Venezuela into economic and humanitarian crisis during his rule.
And then get into the really heavy stuff, the criminal allegations.
Exactly. We need to analyze those devastating criminal allegations laid out by the U.S. Department of Justice.
And finally, look at the unprecedented nature of it all. The international legality of his physical extraction, and now his trial in the United States.
It's a massive story, and we have to ensure we cover all the critical details that truly define this man's impact.
Precisely. To understand the gravity of the capture, we first have to understand the depth of his power and the allegations about the system he presided over. We can't treat him just as a deposed leader.
No.
We have to treat him as the central figure in a global criminal and political drama.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. When we look at Nicolas Maduro, the contrast between his humble working-class origins and these massive global charges he's facing now is, it's striking.
It's night and day. He was born in Caracas in 1962. His father, Nicolas Maduro Garcia, was a pretty prominent trade union leader himself.
So politics was in the family then?
Yeah, it was in the blood, you could say. And those roots in the working class and in trade unionism, they are the absolute foundation of his entire political narrative.
Right. His most famous early career milestone was working as a bus driver for the Caracas Metro Company for years.
For years. But he wasn't just an employee punching a clock. He was an activist. He founded an unofficial, a sort of parallel trade union at the company.
Which was a risky move, right?
A very risky move. He was specifically defying the existing ban on those kinds of organizations. So this established him very early on as a legitimate leader in the eyes of the working class and, a figure willing to challenge institutional rules.
So the political groundwork was laid through that labor activism. But that wasn't his first interaction with organized politics, was it?
No, you're right. His involvement actually started earlier during his high school years at Liceo Jose Avalos. He became a member of the student union there.
And that's a crucial detail that often gets overlooked.
It really is. Even though records seem to suggest he never formally graduated from high school, he had already begun to engage in the organizational structure of political activism.
And that involvement then solidified in the early 1990s.
That's when he becomes closely associated with the MBR 200, the movement that backed Hugo Chávez.
And this is where his loyalty and his political commitment truly crystallized, right? Campaigning for Chávez's release after the failed 1992 coup attempt.
Yes. But our sources highlight a deeper, maybe more profound connection that even predates Chávez's political success, one that ties Maduro to international socialist forces right from the very start.
We're talking about the Cuba connection.
The Havana connection. This is a key insight that I think radically reframes Maduro's entire trajectory. It's noted that he spent time in Cuba attending a political training course.
Okay, of course.
It was at the Escuela Nacional de Cuadros Julio Antonio Mella in Havana. This place was directed by the Union of Young Communists. This was not, a summer course. It was intense political indoctrination and networking.
And what's the deeper implication there, according to analysts like Carlos Peñalosa-Zambrano?
Well, Peñalosa-Zambrano alleges that during his time there, Cuban intelligence, the feared Dirección de Inteligencia, or G2, they allegedly tasked Maduro with a very specific long-term mission.
Which was?
To serve as a mole to approach Hugo Chávez.
Wow. So at the time, Chávez was just a rising military figure, not yet a dominant political leader.
Exactly. The idea was to embed a reliable, politically trained socialist deep within Chávez's burgeoning inner circle.
So if this allegation is true?
If it's true, it means Maduro's loyalty wasn't just ideological or personal to Chávez. It was strategically cultivated by the Cuban state.
Why would Cuban intelligence feel the need to plant a mole near Chávez, though? Why not just cultivate Chávez directly?
I think it speaks to the level of long-term strategic influence Cuba sought in Venezuela. Venezuela, with its massive oil reserves, was always considered the jewel in the crown of Latin American socialism.
Of course.
And Cuba, which had struggled economically for decades, saw Chávez as a potential source of massive financial and political support.
So, by embedding a loyalist like Maduro,
one who was already ideologically aligned, union-based, and politically savvy, they ensured that when the revolution did come, a trusted, non-military figure with deep Cuban ties would be perfectly positioned for high office.
So his rise wasn't just local Venezuelan politics. It was part of this decades-long transnational socialist project.
That's the argument. And that foundation of loyalty and strategic backing really explains the speed of his ascent in the 2000s once Chávez took power.
It was incredibly rapid.
Unbelievably so. He was elected to the National Assembly in 2000, representing the Capital District. By 2005, he had already reached the powerful position of President of the National Assembly.
And that's a critical post. It controls the legislative agenda, judicial appointments.
Everything. He then transitioned in 2006 to Minister of Foreign Affairs, a role he held for 6 years, all the way until 2012.
And his time as foreign minister is where he really began shaping Venezuela's global identity as a deliberate geopolitical rival to the U.S. What was the central thrust of that foreign policy shift?
The central thrust was to aggressively expand Venezuela's foreign policy, beyond Latin American borders, to approach almost any government that rivaled the United States.
A deliberate, ideological, anti-imperialist campaign.
Absolutely, and it was largely funded by sky-high oil prices. We see this in specific, calculated moves, severing relations with Taiwan in favor of the People's Republic of China,
right,
supporting Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, recognizing the state of Palestine, and critically, backing Bashar al-Assad during the escalating Syrian civil war.
And he broke ties with Israel.
During the 2008-09 Gaza war, this wasn't passive diplomacy. It was active antagonism toward U.S. global interests.
And this antagonism wasn't just abstract, was it? It led to some very personal, very high-stakes diplomatic confrontations, like that incident in New York in 2006.
That anecdote is a perfect illustration of the growing hostility. It happened right after Chávez gave his infamous "the devil" speech about President George W. Bush at the UN General Assembly.
I remember that.
So Maduro, then foreign minister, was trying to fly out of JFK Airport, and he was detained for about 90 minutes by U.S. Department of Homeland Security officers.
The official reason given was routine secondary screening. But Maduro and Chávez, they saw it very differently.
Oh, they absolutely framed it as a deliberate act of political retaliation. The incident allegedly began when Maduro tried to get a personal item from the security area and was prohibited. He then identified himself as a diplomat.
And despite presenting his diplomatic passport,
he and other Venezuelan officials were ordered to undergo a full pat-down, which they forcefully refused, citing diplomatic immunity. Maduro's passport was held for a time.
What was the immediate political response?
Maduro filed a formal complaint at the United Nations, arguing the detention was illegal and punitive retaliation for Chávez's comments. Chávez publicly backed him up, specifically linking the detention to Maduro's loyalty during the 1992 failed coup.
And the U.S. response?
U.S. and UN officials called the event regrettable, but they denied any specific mistreatment. But for our purposes, the incident just showcases that the deep personal level of hostility and suspicion between Maduro and the U.S. government was already fully baked into the relationship years before he became president.
It was this history, then, The loyalty, the political savvy, the direct confrontation with the U.S. that led Chávez to choose him as his successor.
It seems so. Chávez, battling recurring cancer, named Maduro in 2011 as his choice. He explicitly cited Maduro's loyalty, especially during the 2002 coup attempt against Chávez himself.
And this decision sidelined other powerful, arguably more established figures.
Oh, absolutely. People like Diosdado Cabello, the head of the military. Chávez officially endorsed Maduro in December 2012, calling him one of the young leaders with the greatest ability to continue the Bolivarian revolution.
So when Chávez died on March 5, 2013, Maduro stepped right in as interim president. But even that initial move was legally contested by the opposition.
It was heavily contested because it seemed to violate the spirit and maybe even the letter of the Constitution.
What was their argument?
Opposition critics pointed to Articles 229, 231, and 233 of the Venezuelan Constitution. The argument was that when a president dies, the power should pass to the president of the National Assembly, who would then call an election.
But Maduro was vice president at the time.
Correct. By taking power himself, Maduro was seen as usurping the process. Nevertheless, the pro-Chávez Supreme Tribunal upheld Maduro's action, and he immediately became the unanimous Socialist Party candidate for the special election that was held shortly thereafter.
So Maduro wins that 2013 special election, but it was a narrow and immediately disputed victory, just a 1.5% margin over Enrique Capriles.
And the opposition immediately demanded a full recount, which was never carried out to their satisfaction.
So this deeply contested start seems to have set the tone for the permanent political crisis that defined his entire decade in power.
I think that disputed 2013 victory was the moment Venezuela's descent really accelerated. Scholars have analyzed this, and they say Maduro maintained power not through a renewed democratic mandate, but through a calculated strategy.
Which was?
Leveraging high initial oil revenue, relying on international ties established under Chávez, and most critically, inheriting and then aggressively expanding the existing institutions of repression and autocracy.
And a primary mechanism for that expansion was the power to rule by decree, essentially bypassing the legislature altogether.
It became the defining characteristic of his rule. I mean, within 6 months of taking office, Maduro was granted the power to rule by decree.
What was the justification at the time?
Initially, it was under the guise of launching an economic offensive to tackle the mounting inflation and chronic shortages. But this power was renewed multiple times in 2015, 2016, always just rubber-stamped by the Supreme Tribunal.
And the opposition consistently condemned this.
Of course. They viewed it as the wholesale usurpation of legislative authority.
And this judicial maneuvering became the central battleground after the 2015 parliamentary elections, where the opposition finally secured a massive victory, winning a supermajority in the National Assembly.
This was a genuine democratic challenge to the Chavista regime. It was a huge moment.
So what was Maduro's immediate response?
A strategic, complex judicial coup. Before the new National Assembly could even take office, the outgoing pro-Maduro lame duck assembly stacked the Supreme Tribunal of Justice, the TSJ, by appointing a host of new, fiercely loyal magistrates.
And once the opposition National Assembly began legislating,
the TSJ systematically issued rulings that just stripped the legislature of its authority.
Could you elaborate on how they did that? What mechanism did the TSJ use to just nullify the will of the voters?
Well, it was a step-by-step process of legalistic erosion. The TSJ cited various, often contradictory, constitutional articles and procedural grounds to declare the National Assembly's acts null and void.
But then it got even more extreme.
It did. Crucially, in March 2017, the TSJ went freest, effectively assuming the legislative powers of the National Assembly itself. They ruled that the legislature was in contempt of previous TSJ rulings.
And that triggered the 2017 constitutional crisis.
Yes, and led to massive, prolonged, and violent nationwide protests. It was this move that prompted the New York Times to declare Venezuela was moving closer to one-man rule.
Now, we have to balance this discussion. We need to include Maduro's consistent and fierce counterclaims about this crisis. He never once accepted that he was responsible for any of it.
That narrative consistency is fundamental to understanding his support base and his global position. Maduro consistently and vehemently denied all allegations of electoral fraud, misconduct, and human rights abuses.
What was his standard defense?
His standard defense, which he has maintained since 2013, is that the entire crisis was manufactured. It was an economic warfare, a coup d'etat in slow motion, engineered by the U.S. and its regional allies.
The goal being regime change.
Explicitly. He claimed the goal was regime change. motivated by Venezuela's immense oil reserves. And he framed himself and the Bolivarian Revolution as the noble victims of imperial aggression.
And that position allowed him to justify all subsequent repressive actions.
As necessary defenses of national sovereignty, yes.
That defense, however, struggles to stand up against the international consensus that coalesced around the nature of his rule. When did the terms dictator and authoritarian regime become the standard descriptions?
Those labels became pretty much inescapable following two key events: the deliberate neutralization of the opposition-controlled National Assembly after 2015 and the installation of the controversial 2017 Constituent Assembly.
And that's when international bodies shifted their language.
They did. Foreign Affairs published articles arguing the country had moved into a full-on dictatorship. OAS General Secretary Luis Almagro declared Maduro was becoming a dictator. The U.S. formalized this in July 2017 by imposing sanctions and officially labeling Maduro a dictator, effectively barring him from entering the country.
The international findings on human rights during this period are staggering. I mean, they just can't be overstated. We need to detail the severity of the institutional violence.
The findings paint a picture of widespread state-sponsored violence and impunity. The UN and Human Rights Watch allege that thousands of people died in state-sanctioned extrajudicial killings. Thousands. Amnesty International provided concrete figures. They reported 8,292 extrajudicial executions carried out between 2015 and 2017 alone.
That's horrifying.
These killings were often carried out by security forces during raids targeting young men in low-income neighborhoods, frequently under the pretense of anti-crime or anti-coup operations. Disturbingly, in 1 year, over a fifth, 22% of all recorded homicides were attributed directly to state security forces.
And the allegations extended beyond just killings, didn't they? They included torture and arbitrary detention, according to the Organization of American States.
Absolutely. An OAS board of independent experts in 2018 compiled evidence alleging that definite crimes against humanity, including systematic torture, forced disappearances, arbitrary detentions, had been committed during Maduro's presidency. The system was designed to crush dissent, not just manage it.
And the victims weren't just political opponents.
Not at all. The victims were ordinary citizens protesting hunger and the lack of basic services.
And the judicial system, which was supposed to be the protector of citizens, was itself described as being completely subverted to serve state repression.
The erosion of judicial independence, particularly detailed by UN human rights experts in 2021, is key to the regime's control. They concluded the justice system was serving state repression and ensuring impunity for perpetrators of abuse.
How so?
Well, judges were found to be sustaining charges based entirely on manipulated or fabricated evidence, often ignoring credible allegations of torture.
So there was no recourse.
There are documented cases where victims, visibly injured from abuse, were returned by judges directly to the detention centers where they were tortured. This signals to the security forces that these actions would not only be tolerated, but implicitly endorsed. It meant there was essentially no legal path for victims of state violence.
Let's dedicate some time to the severe economic hardship, because that is what drove the massive historical flight of Venezuelans. We're talking about a humanitarian crisis on a colossal scale.
The scale is immense. An estimated 7 million Venezuelans have fled the country. That's one of the largest refugee and migrant crises in modern history.
And the economic collapse was a perfect storm.
It was. The mismanagement of the state-owned oil company, PDVSA, coupled with corruption and sanctions, led to hyperinflation that made the national currency virtually worthless.
And basic services just broke down.
Completely. Healthcare, electricity, water, food supply. The average Venezuelan lost a tremendous amount of weight due to food scarcity, a phenomenon dubbed the Maduro diet.
And this is where the optics of the ruling class really incensed the international community and the starving populace. The visual disconnect was enormous.
It was profoundly jarring. While millions were searching for food scraps, Maduro and his inner circle were publicly documented indulging in extreme luxury.
Right, there were two incidents that became global symbols of this.
Unforgettable. First, in November 2017, Maduro was caught on a live broadcast, completely unaware he was still being filmed, pulling an empanada from his desk and beginning to eat it while addressing the nation about food scarcity.
And then the infamous Salt Bay incident.
Yes. In September 2018, while traveling back from China, Maduro and Celia Flores stopped in Istanbul. They were photographed and filmed eating a lavish, expensive, meat-heavy meal at one of Salpe's luxury steakhouses. The images went viral immediately.
And the rage they caused.
The Wall Street Journal highlighted the rage this caused among poor Venezuelans who faced crippling food shortages and often couldn't afford meat. And this was swiftly followed by leaked videos in December 2018 showing a glamorous, French, wine-fueled Christmas party taking place right inside the Supreme Tribunal of Justice.
The very body that had helped him maintain power while the country starved.
The message was clear. The revolution's elite were utterly isolated from the suffering they were presiding over.
Shifting to foreign policy, the antagonism with the U.S. just continued to escalate, leading to open threats and eventually alleged physical attempts on Maduro's life.
The breakdown was complete. After Trump threatened a military option in 2017, the U.S. broke diplomatic ties in 2019 when they recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as the legitimate interim president.
And Maduro consistently framed all of these actions
as part of a U.S.-led coup plot, always.
Let's talk about the actual documented assassination attempts that his government reported.
Well, the most dramatic incident was the 2018 drone attack in Caracas. It was during a military parade where explosives detonated near the stage where Maduro was speaking.
And the government's response?
They quickly blamed opposition forces aided by the U.S. However, this incident remains controversial.
How so?
Many observers, including journalists and analysts, suggested it could have been a false flag operation designed by the regime to justify further crackdowns and purges within the government and the military.
And then there was Operation Gideon.
In May 2020, yes, a group led by the U.S. private security company Silvercorp USA attempted a military incursion to overthrow Maduro. Maduro's government blamed the U.S. and the DEA, though the Trump administration denied direct involvement.
So regardless of whether they were false flags or real threats, the resulting climate was one of intense paranoia and tightening control, which extended directly to the press.
Absolutely. The period between 2013 and 2018 saw a catastrophic decline in press freedom. 115 media outlets, print, radio, television, were shut down during Maduro's first tenure.
115.
Venezuela's rank on the Once Press Freedom Index plunged 42 places. The government achieved this control through various means. Denying access to hard currency for importing paper, so print media collapsed, and using state institutions like the National Guard to physically block journalists from accessing key government buildings.
Leading to widespread information blackouts.
Exactly, especially during politically sensitive events.
We've traced Nicolás Maduro's path from trade union activist to a highly contested president, presiding over a humanitarian and institutional catastrophe. We've established the pattern of judicial manipulation, the massive human rights abuses, and the devastating economic failure. Now, we shift our focus entirely to the criminal charges, the massive U.S. indictment that accuses him, his family, and his inner circle of running a decades-long narco-terrorism enterprise. This segment will detail the specific evidence and allegations that formed the legal basis for his unprecedented capture. Stay with us.
So grateful for the opportunity to work with these kids and see these kids just in their day-to-day and be a part of that and to have a difference in the community.
Because of GlobalWare, we are able to bring hundreds of people to come to Thailand here in Shangdao, learn about the community, interact with all the children here, and for that I'm so thankful.
So we're so excited to be out here with GlobalWare, helping build these schools for the children. We're doing painting, we're laying down new pathways, building new bathrooms, water towers, a new worship center for them. It's just amazing to see the smiles on these kids' faces and the impact that GlobalWare is having here in Thailand.
So GlobalWare, it's been an amazing impact trip, being able to see the kids and to just know that the charity work that we're doing is making a huge difference and impact in their lives. Seeing their smiles, there's not much better than that.
These type of service opportunities are amazing. I think everybody needs to be lifted once in a while in their lives, and it's amazing to be God's hand in someone else's life. And thank you, GlobalWare, for giving us this opportunity.
It's been awesome working with GlobalWare. I mean, they're doing a lot for these kids. We got a lot of bodies out here putting these schools together, and it's just been great.
It's been awesome working with GlobalWare. It's great to give back to the kids and everything. It's just been awesome. I don't know if you guys got a chance to see what we're doing here, but what we're doing is amazing. Giving back is just making us feel really, really good about ourselves, and it's awesome.
It's been great here in Chiang Mai in Thailand with GlobalWare. We've had a lot of good time making the school. We built a wall yesterday. It's just great to be able to give back and help out the kids in the local hill tribe who are so giving. Like I mentioned that I liked someone's hat yesterday and he just offered it to me. You know, so it's like they're just so giving, and it's just great to give back to people like that.
I love the opportunity that GlobalWare has given us to work with these children and help them create a safe environment.
Welcome back. We now arrive at the legal core of this entire story, the massive superseding indictment filed by the U.S. Department of Justice. This document provides the official U.S. narrative for why Nicolás Maduro was targeted for capture.
It does, and it accuses him and his highest associates of crimes that really blur the lines between organized crime and state governance.
This indictment is significant not just for the severity of the charges, but for the sheer scope of the alleged conspiracy.
It is. The initial charges were filed back in March 2020, but the subsequent updates named a real rogues gallery of high-level officials. Maduro himself, Diosdado Cabello Rondon.
A key political rival and military figure.
Right. His wife, Celia Adela Flores de Maduro, the First Lady, and his son, Nicolás Ernesto Maduro Guerra, or Nicolasito.
So let's clearly define the primary charges against them. We're talking narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, and conspiracy involving machine guns. This is much more severe than simple drug trafficking.
Much more.
What exactly elevates this to narco-terrorism?
That distinction is crucial. Narco-terrorism, in the context of this indictment, implies that the drug trafficking operation was not merely for personal enrichment.
Yeah.
It was explicitly used to consolidate and maintain political power, undermining state institutions and stability for ideological or political gain.
So the indictment alleges that Maduro and his co-conspirators leveraged government power.
Military assets, intelligence protection, all to ensure the safe passage of cocaine shipments. Then they use the proceeds to fund the political machine, maintain control, and potentially finance paramilitary activities or secure the loyalty of high-ranking military officials.
So essentially, operating the state as a criminal enterprise that directly supports political power.
That's the core of the allegation.
And this operation is tied directly to the infamous Cartel of the Suns.
Correct. The indictment alleges that Maduro and his inner circle sat at the very apex of the Cartel de los Soles, the Cartel of the Suns.
And that name comes from?
It derives from the sun insignias worn by high-ranking officials in the Venezuelan armed forces. It describes the sophisticated hierarchical system where the highest echelons of the Venezuelan military and political elite use their official positions.
Military control, diplomatic immunity, law enforcement coverage.
To facilitate, protect, and profit from the massive transit of cocaine.
How large was the scale of this alleged operation, and why was Venezuela so geographically critical to it?
The scale is staggering. By 2020, the U.S. State Department estimated that between 200 and 250 tons of cocaine were trafficked through Venezuela annually.
250 tons.
Annually. And Venezuela's geography makes it indispensable for Colombian narcotics. It offers vast, largely ungoverned territories and a northern coast that is ideal for launching shipments into the Caribbean and towards the U.S.
So the indictment frames Venezuela not just as a transit route, but as a critical hub managed by state actors.
Exactly.
The most explosive allegation, though, is the long-running partnership between the Venezuelan regime and designated foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs. What groups are named and what was the nature of this alleged collaboration?
The superseding indictment details that this collaboration allegedly began as far back as 1999.
Wow.
And it involved numerous powerful groups. These FTOs include the Colombian organizations, FARC, specifically the breakaway factions, FARC-EP and Segunda Marquetalia, and the ELN.
But also Mexican cartels.
Yes. Mexican cartels like the Sinaloa cartel and the Zetas, now known as CDN. And crucially, it also names the rising Venezuelan violent transnational criminal organization Tren de Aragua, TDA, and its leader.
So what, according to the DOJ, was Maduro's specific quid pro quo in this arrangement?
The indictment states explicitly that Maduro and his high-level associates provided these organizations with law enforcement cover and logistical support for the transport of cocaine through Venezuela.
And in exchange?
In exchange, the regime allegedly received immense financial payments, essentially taxing the drug trade, and they benefited from the FTO's ability to enforce border control and suppress local opposition movements near the Colombian frontier. It was an alleged symbiotic relationship where criminals gained state protection and the state gained criminal funding.
And the indictment goes into extreme detail, listing specific overt acts to demonstrate this deep involvement, including actions taken by Maduro when he was just the foreign minister.
Yes, and this moves the allegation from passive acceptance to active participation. One critical piece of evidence surrounds his tenure between 2006 and 2008. The DOJ alleges that during this time, Maduro personally sold Venezuelan diplomatic passports to individuals he knew to be drug traffickers.
So a direct monetization of his diplomatic authority.
Exactly. Furthermore, he allegedly used his position to facilitate the repatriation of large amounts of drug proceeds from Mexico back to Venezuela.
How did that repatriation scheme allegedly work?
The procedure was sophisticated. It is alleged that Maduro would use his authority as foreign minister to call the Venezuelan embassy in Mexico, announcing the arrival of a diplomatic mission on a private plane.
So that diplomatic cover ensured the plane was exempt from usual inspection.
Right. The traffickers would then load the plane with hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash drug proceeds and fly it back to Venezuela, often meeting with the Venezuelan ambassador in Mexico to maintain the illusion of an official visit.
And the flight would receive zero scrutiny upon arrival.
Correct. Successfully washing illicit funds back into the country and potentially into the ruling elite's hands.
And his wife, Cilia Flores, the former First Lady, she's implicated in similar bribery and facilitation schemes.
That's right. In approximately 2007, Cilia Flores de Maduro allegedly accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes.
For what purpose?
The purpose of these payments was to broker meetings between a major drug trafficker and Nestor Reverol Torres, who at the time was the director of Venezuela's National Anti-Drug Office.
And after that initial bribe?
After that, the trafficker allegedly paid monthly bribes to Reverol Torres, plus an additional sum around $100,000 for every cocaine transporting flight, ensuring its safe passage through Venezuelan airspace and airports.
And a portion of those payments was then allegedly diverted directly to Flores de Maduro.
That is the allegation, yes.
This alleged pattern of using state offices for protection brings us to the famous Narco-Sobrinos incident in 2015, which implicated the extended First Family.
That case was a global sensation because it connected the crime directly to the president's residence. Cilia Flores' two nephews, Efrain Antonio Campo Flores and Francisco Flores de Freitas, were arrested by the DEA in Haiti in 2015.
And they had been recorded in meetings with confidential sources.
They had. Agreeing to organize and dispatch massive multi-hundred-kilogram cocaine shipments. Critically, these shipments were scheduled to leave from Maduro's own presidential hangar at Macusha Airport.
Which indicates that the highest levels of security and authority were being used to protect the enterprise.
It certainly implies that.
And the subsequent U.S. trial revealed a profoundly political motive behind the drug trafficking. It wasn't just about drugs for profit, was it?
No, the motive was allegedly political survival. Evidence presented at their U.S. trial in 2016 suggested the nephews were seeking to raise $20 million in drug proceeds.
For what?
This money was allegedly intended to fund the family's political machine during the critical late 2015 National Assembly elections. One nephew referred to Maduro as his father and explicitly stated that their goal was to raise the funds necessary for the family to take control again of the National Assembly. This elevated the crime from mere trafficking to an alleged plot to use criminal funds to undermine and corrupt the democratic process to maintain power.
And this alleged intergenerational criminal activity extends to Maduro's own son, Nicolás Maduro Guerra, or Nicolásito. What are the specific allegations against the prince?
The allegations against Maduro Guerra are equally stark. He served in various high-level government positions, a fast-tracked path to power.
Right.
The indictment references the testimony of a Venezuelan National Guard captain on Margarita Island who claimed that Maduro Guerra visited the island twice monthly using a PDVSA plane owned by the state oil company, and that he was allegedly present while the plane was loaded with large tape-wrapped packages that the captain understood to be drugs.
And there were specific drug shipping activities alleged as well.
Yes. In 2017, Maduro Guerra allegedly became involved in planning the shipment of hundreds of kilograms of cocaine destined for Miami, Florida. He reportedly discussed sending lower-quality cocaine to New York and organizing a 500-kilogram shipment to be unloaded near Miami.
So the implication throughout all these overt acts is a complete intertwining of the state apparatus, diplomatic channels, the national oil company, and the first family's political survival with the international drug trade.
That's the picture the indictment paints.
There's also an allegation that Maduro himself had to intervene directly to change the operational procedures of the Cartel of the Suns after a catastrophic seizure.
That event, if true, confirms the alleged involvement at the presidential level. In September 2013, shortly after Maduro became president, approximately 1.3 tons of cocaine were seized by French authorities on a commercial flight from Marquesas Airport headed to Paris.
A massive public embarrassment.
Huge. Following this, the indictment claims Maduro convened a meeting with Cabello and other co-conspirators.
And what was the presidential instruction?
According to the indictment, Maduro instructed them to stop using Marquesas Airport for drug trafficking. He reminded them of a previous large seizure in Mexico back in 2006. He allegedly advised them to use other well-established drug routes and locations to dispatch cocaine.
Which indicates an ongoing operational knowledge of these routes.
It would seem so. And to deflect public scrutiny, he then authorized the arrests of certain low-level military officials to create the appearance of a crackdown, while allegedly shielding his own and Cabello's participation in facilitating the shipment and its cover-up.
This complex web of evidence truly frames the regime as a fully operational narco-state.
It does. I mean, the indictment even details the regime's protective relationship with FTOs on the border. It notes that a former interior minister maintained a large estate with a FARC encampment and training school operating nearby. He allegedly accepted bribes to shield drug traffickers from arrest.
And more recently,
in 2022 and 2024, Cabello was allegedly traveling regularly to clandestine airstrips controlled by the ELN near the border to ensure cocaine's safe passage through Venezuelan territory. This level of alleged sustained collaboration demonstrates that the use of narcotics proceeds and criminal groups was central to the regime's long-term political and operational structure.
This detailed criminal indictment sets the stage for the escalating confrontation in the final years of Maduro's rule, beginning with the highly disputed 2024 presidential election. This political charade was arguably the final pretext that allowed the international community to ratchet up pressure.
The election was poisoned from the start. The Maduro government systematically barred the most credible and popular opposition candidate, Maria Corina Machado, from running,
citing a 15-year political ban.
Based on very questionable administrative decisions, this move was universally condemned by the OAS, the EU, and Human Rights Watch as a blatant violation of political rights in free elections.
And when the election actually took place, the official results were immediately dismissed as fiction.
On July 29, 2024, the government-controlled National Electoral Council, the CNE, announced that Maduro had won a third term with 51.2% of the vote.
But the numbers didn't add up.
Not at all. The opposition, backed by parallel tallies collected by civil society groups, academics, and international news outlets like the New York Times, released convincing evidence showing a landslide victory for the opposition candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez.
The lack of transparency was a global scandal.
The UN Secretary General's office noted there was no precedent in contemporary democratic elections for a state electoral body announcing a winner without providing any verifiable tabulated results, which the CNE failed to do.
And experts called it what it was:
Political scientist Stephen Levitsky called the official count one of the most egregious electoral frauds in modern Latin American history. Consequently, the U.S., the EU, and the majority of Latin American countries immediately rejected the results as illegitimate.
Only staunch allies like Russia, China, and Cuba publicly supported Maduro's claim to victory.
That's right.
So how did Maduro ensure his victory was cemented despite the international rejection? By turning, once again, to his stacked judiciary.
It was exactly the same playbook he used against the National Assembly years earlier. Maduro asked the Loyal Supreme Tribunal of Justice, the TSJ, to audit and approve the highly questionable results.
And predictably.
Predictably, the TSJ validated the CNE's announcement.
And then came the crackdown.
Yes. In the ensuing crackdown against opposition figures who dared to challenge the count, an arrest warrant was issued for the opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez in September 2024 for alleged crimes including usurpation of functions and conspiracy.
Which forced him to flee.
He fled to the Spanish embassy for asylum before eventually being flown to Spain. Maduro was nevertheless sworn in for his third term on January 10, 2025.
With that election crisis passed, the U.S. shifted its strategy from sanctions and diplomatic pressure to actively escalating the criminal price tag on Maduro's head.
The bounty became the symbolic centerpiece of the U.S. strategy. It had initially been set at $15 million in 2020. Immediately following that disputed January 2025 inauguration, the U.S. State Department dramatically increased the reward for information leading to Maduro's arrest to $25 million.
And that was only the halfway point.
By August 2025, the bounty was doubled again, reaching an unprecedented $50 million.
$50 million.
Attorney General Pam Bondi made a highly public statement explicitly linking the bounty to Maduro's alleged status as a high-level criminal. She specifically cited the collaboration with international groups like Tren de Aragua, the Sinaloa cartel, and the Cartel of the Suns.
So they were laying out the criminal case in public.
She publicly labeled him as one of the world's most notorious narco-traffickers and a direct threat to U.S. national security interests.
The U.S. government also simultaneously ramped up the pressure by seizing assets linked to the regime.
They did. They publicly detailed the scale of their success in financial warfare. The U.S. Department of Justice claimed to have seized approximately $700 million in assets linked to Maduro and his inner circle.
What kind of assets are we talking about?
Allegedly, multiple luxury homes in Florida, a mansion in the Dominican Republic, private jets, luxury vehicles, and massive sums of cash. Attorney General Bondi described the entire Maduro government as an organized crime operation that the U.S. was actively dismantling brick by brick through financial pressure.
Throughout all this, Maduro continued his public defiance, which only seemed to accelerate the rhetorical war.
His rhetoric became intensely aggressive. In August 2025, after the bounty was doubled, Maduro used a nationally televised speech to dare then-President Trump to arrest him.
He dared him.
He specifically warned American leaders that any attempt to physically capture him or enact a military operation would provoke a response that, in his words, could lead to the end of the American empire. This rhetoric framed the eventual capture as a direct consequence of a challenge he himself had issued.
But the U.S. wasn't just relying on public bounties and tough talk. The sources indicate they were actively involved in attempting covert operations to capture him before the final military action in January 2026.
Yes, the failure of the October 2025 attempt is highly illustrative of the U.S. strategy. The plan involved recruiting Maduro's personal pilot, General Bitner Villegas.
How did that work?
A U.S. Homeland Security agent met with Villegas in the Dominican Republic, offering him significant wealth in exchange for diverting Maduro's presidential aircraft to an undisclosed location where U.S. authorities could legally take custody of him.
So they were in contact for a while.
For 16 months, the U.S. agent maintained encrypted communication with the general, trying to secure his cooperation.
And the outcome?
The plan failed when General Villegas, at the critical moment, reaffirmed his loyalty to Maduro publicly, exposing the covert U.S. attempt.
Which proved to U.S. authorities that securing his capture through recruitment or defection was unlikely.
And it likely contributed to the decision to move toward a more direct intervention.
And just weeks before that intervention, the U.S. administration made a significant final legal move to justify hostile measures.
Yes. In November 2025, the Trump administration took the definitive step of officially labeling Nicolás Maduro and his key government allies as members of a foreign terrorist organization, an FTO. This designation went beyond just calling him a narco-trafficker.
It legally classified him as a state sponsor of terrorism.
Correct. providing further, stronger justification for any escalating hostile measure taken by the U.S. government.
That brings us directly to the unprecedented event that concluded his rule. In the pre-dawn hours of January 3, 2026, the rhetorical warnings and covert attempts ended, replaced by definitive military action.
The operation was swift and highly secretive. In the pre-dawn hours of January 3, 2026, the United States launched military operations, including targeted strikes, within Venezuela. The purpose was clear: to locate and apprehend the target.
And at approximately 4:20 a.m. Eastern Standard Time,
U.S. President Donald Trump announced that Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, had been successfully captured by U.S. forces, which were reported to be components of Delta Force, a highly specialized counterterrorism unit.
the logistics of physically extracting a head of state from his own sovereign territory are immense. It really speaks to the military planning involved.
They were extraordinary. The couple was immediately transferred out of Venezuelan airspace. They were initially secured aboard the USS Iwo Jima, an amphibious assault ship which was strategically positioned nearby.
And from there, directly to the United States.
Directly. They were flown to Stewart Air National Guard Base in upstate New York that same day. Maduro was then transported to the Metropolitan Detention Center, MDC, in Brooklyn.
And U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi confirmed they would both face the full weight of the indictment.
Narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, and machine gun possession. All of it.
And his initial court appearance in Manhattan Federal Court was extremely rapid, just 48 hours later.
Indeed. On January 5, 2026, both Maduro and Flores were arraigned. Both pleaded not guilty to all charges. U.S. District Judge Alvin Hellerstein ordered Maduro to be held without bail, setting a crucial status hearing for mid-March.
The speed of the legal process really reflects the years the DOJ had spent preparing this case.
They were ready the moment he was in U.S. custody.
And this is where the political framing of the capture came into sharp focus, with Maduro's defiant declaration during the arraignment.
His declaration is central to the legal and political controversy. Maduro asserted that he was not a criminal defendant, but a kidnapped president and a prisoner of war.
He maintained his narrative.
He maintained that he is the legal office holder and that the entire operation was an act of illegal imperial aggression against Venezuelan sovereignty. The Guardian reported that he repeatedly stated to the judge, "I am still president of my country."
This action by the U.S., the unilateral military extraction of a de facto head of state, immediately raised massive fundamental questions about international law and state sovereignty.
This is where the precedent is truly shocking. Legal experts around the globe immediately flagged the action as a likely violation of the UN Charter, specifically Article 2.4,
which dictates respect for sovereignty
and prohibits the unauthorized use of military force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. The U.S. intervention was not sanctioned by the UN Security Council or requested by a recognized government inside Venezuela. It created a massive international incident.
What was the immediate global reaction from international bodies?
The reaction was swift and deeply concerned. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres expressed deep concern, stating that he was deeply concerned that the rules of international law have not been respected.
So the international community, even those who are hostile to Maduro, are grappling with a potential precedent here.
They are. If the U.S. can unilaterally abduct a head of state over criminal charges, what protection remains for any leader deemed adversarial by a powerful nation?
And how did the remaining government structure within Venezuela react to the vacuum?
The reaction was chaotic, but followed the existing constitutional framework of the loyalists.
Yeah.
Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez immediately demanded proof of life following the U.S. announcement.
And the Supreme Tribunal.
The Supreme Tribunal of Justice, the institution that had remained loyal to Maduro, quickly appointed Delcy Rodriguez as acting president. Both she and Maduro, through his statement in court, maintain that he remains the legal office holder.
So an immediate de jure facto crisis.
Exactly.
So if the U.S. recognized Juan Guaido as the de jure president, does that mean the U.S. government's legal defense for the extraction is that they didn't technically capture a sitting head of state, but rather a high-ranking indicted criminal?
That is precisely the legal argument the U.S. will lean on. By officially recognizing Guaido back in 2019, the U.S. government legally positioned Maduro not as a sovereign head of state entitled to diplomatic immunity, but as an illegitimate ruler and a criminal enterprise leader.
So they would argue it was an act of extraordinary law enforcement
against a designated narco-terrorist, rather than a military invasion against a sovereign nation. However, the international community, and the UN in particular, still views military action on sovereign territory without explicit authorization as a violation, regardless of who is defined as the legitimate leader.
In the immediate aftermath, were there any coordinated international financial actions?
Yes, showing the swift international cooperation against the regime's illicit wealth. The Swiss government moved rapidly just hours after the capture was announced, imposing a 4-year freeze on any assets held by Maduro and his close associates in Switzerland.
Adding to the expensive financial seizures already claimed by the U.S.,
Yes.
we have now traced this incredible convoluted journey. From Nicolas Maduro's roots as a loyal trade unionist and Chávez's heir, through a decade where he presided over one of the world's most severe humanitarian crises, and the systematic dismantling of democratic institutions. We've detailed the colossal allegations that he used the state apparatus to run a narco-terrorism enterprise tied to international FTOs, culminating in his dramatic and unprecedented capture by U.S. military forces.
I think the key takeaways here are fundamentally about sovereignty, criminality, and accountability. We've seen the sheer scale of alleged corruption, millions, potentially billions of dollars and thousands of tons of cocaine tied directly to the highest levels of government and his immediate family.
And the truly unprecedented nature of the physical extraction and trial of a de facto head of state in the United States.
It sets an extremely volatile international precedent regarding how powerful nations choose to enforce their legal interpretations against adversarial regimes.
It definitely raises more questions than it answers regarding global stability. And that leads to the final, provocative question we'd like to leave with you, our listener, to consider. The International Criminal Court, the ICC, had opened an investigation into alleged crimes against humanity.
The torture, the extrajudicial killings.
Committed under Maduro's rule, acts which affected millions of Venezuelans who are still suffering. Does the U.S. unilateral military capture, regardless of the questionable international legality it presents concerning sovereignty, effectively short-circuit or enable a path toward justice for the victims of those atrocity crimes?
It forces us to ask whether justice for criminal acts is better served by a national court or justice for atrocity crimes is better served by international mechanisms. The removal of Maduro from power, even if done illegally, may clear a path for democratic reform.
Potentially allowing victims to find justice locally.
Potentially. Or it could simply mean that the investigation by the ICC, focused specifically on state atrocities, becomes overshadowed and complicated by the U.S. focus on drug crimes. The choice between these two forms of justice is profound.
We hope you're a bit more informed now. Let us know in the comments what you think about the United States' actions in Venezuela. We'll see you next time.